Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me, as always, my co-host, Stephen Young of Roto-Grinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're talking bets for the Daytona 500 here on Running Hot. Last year in the Daytona 500, William Byron was declared the winner, finishing ahead of Hendrick Motorsports teammate Alex Bowman in a side-by-side finish that ended when the yellow flag flew at the start of the 200 and final lap, where video replay, electronic scoring were used to determine that Byron was ahead of his teammate Christopher Bell, rounded out the top three. Pretty exciting finish last year, Stevie. It is Daytona. We tend to always get an exciting finish. It's a great way to start the season. I know you're excited.
Yeah, I love Daytona week. Outside of like not sleeping and being at the track a lot, I absolutely love the race. Like leading up to the race, I think that we're both really excited for the duels this year. I think the duels are going to be probably two of the best duel races we've seen in recent years because we just have so many open cars and like competitive open cars. So I think the duels are going to be fantastic. So yeah, I mean, overall, very excited. Didn't really shock me that William Byron won last year. We talked about him a lot on super speedways last year, kind of stuff that we'll talk about here in just a minute on what to look for on these racetracks. But yeah, really excited for Daytona. Really excited. Like we did our preseason show last week, but really excited to we're back, now we're back. This is the go time. So yeah, super pumped.
Me too, man. I love Daytona. You know that. I love super speedway racing, drafting racing. It's always, I was watching the old races yesterday on Tubi, and man, it's just so exciting. I'm amped up. I'm ready to go. It's Daytona. Let's go. We got 36 weeks of racing ahead of us, and that doesn't even include the All-Star race, right? We got like 37 weeks of racing ahead of us. So we're off to a great season. But you talked about it. The duels is how the field is set, but to qualify for the race, not only do you have the duels, but we have the actual qualification on Wednesday. It's a single lap qualifying. Everybody gets one lap, and the fastest two drivers set the front row for the Daytona 500. So first and second place starting positions will be set on Wednesday for qualifying. The rest of the qualifying sets the starting order for the two Daytona duels. So there's two qualifying races that will determine who starts the Daytona 500 and in what position. So Stevie, those two duels are pretty competitive races, and you mentioned it. We have our chartered cars. So there's 36 chartered cars that are guaranteed spots in the 40-car Daytona 500 field. The other 9 spots will go to I should say the other 9 drivers are open drivers, and they're competing for 4 spots in the Daytona 500 to fill out that 40-car field. The fastest, I believe it's 1 or 2 drivers will be locked into the Daytona 500. However, you can also race your way into the Daytona 500 through the duels if you are the open cars, and they'll be split 5 and 4 between duel 1 and duel 2. Finally, we have a new rule this year we talked about on last week's episode, where you have a provisional that is granted to an exceptional driver from another series. That for this race is Helio Castroneves, racing for Trackhouse Racing. He is guaranteed to be in the Daytona 500. If he races his way or qualifies his way in on speed, then it'll be a 40-car field. But if he doesn't, they will add him to the field as a 41st driver. So there is a chance we get 5 open cars into the Daytona 500 instead of the usual 4. Your thoughts on the format and these open cars?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, qualifying matters so much because, obviously you want a good starting position for the duels. Like you said, the first and second place qualifying spots really, we have practice this year. We have multiple practices. So you could really trim your car out for this qualifying session because you're going to get time to, adjust the race car, which we haven't had, the last couple of years. So I think we're going to see really interesting qualifying this year, just really, really fast qualifying speeds just in general. But then you got the duels, like you said, where you got to race those races, especially with the open cars. And then, the open car is really paying attention to qualifying because the fastest two open cars get into the 500. So,
Mm.
you have potentially six cars racing for two spots in the duels, and it makes the duels so exciting to watch. It's just, this is what Speed Weeks is. This is why we get so excited for Daytona. We get back to back big games because we had one last week, and now we have the Daytona 500. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I love it. Yeah, there's no other word. Like I love Daytona. I've been going to Daytona since I was like 4 or 5 years old. And I'm old now, so I love Daytona.
Yeah, dude, these duels are going to be intense. Maybe the most intense duels we have seen in years since,
Yep.
pre-charter days, 43 car field days, that kind of thing. These duels are going to be intense. They're definitely going to be something to watch. Those will occur on Thursday. So qualifying is Wednesday. The duels are Thursday. Daytona 500 on Sunday. Let's talk about that, Stevie. Daytona 500, Daytona International Speedway, 2.5 mile steeply banked track, and it's so big that we have to use some restrictions of the airflow to the engine through a tapered spacer. It used to be restrictor plates, now it's a tapered spacer. Also, some aerodynamic, modifications to the car to increase drag to really increase that draft. That'll slow these cars down. Otherwise, they'd be going 240 plus miles an hour at Daytona. So we slow them down to get them to around 185 solo and 200 in the draft. And of course, that creates what we call pack racing or drafting racing. So talk about racing at Daytona.
Yeah, I mean, exciting. Very, very high variance racetrack because of, you have two or three wide within a first and 30th or within a second of each other.
Yeah.
And, you get this at two racetracks a year at Talladega and Daytona, and like Atlanta, more of a drafting track too, but you're not going to get, 1 through 30 being within a second of each other. So racing at Daytona is very interesting, and it's changed over the years. And, we've adjusted. The books, I don't feel like have adjusted as much as we've adjusted. So still think there's a really good edge for Daytona and Talladega when it comes to the betting and fantasy markets. So yeah, I mean, racing at Daytona it's bumper to bumper. It's kind of become like a fuel strategy. When do I pit to optimize my fuel strategy? Can I have a Ford next to me? Can I have a Chevy behind me if I'm a Chevy? Like, it's just the way Daytona used to be has changed. You didn't used to want to be up towards the front. You kind of wanted to hang back and let all the madness happen. But with the next gen car, like, if we look at these Daytona races and these Talladega races and you compare where people are finishing, like, average running position has become a huge factor in how I do approach Daytona and
Yep.
Talladega now. So, that's not something we ever really looked at before outside of, like, fantasy wise, like, hey, who's going to be kind of running towards the back and maybe is going to keep the car clean. But yeah, average running position, that was the thing with like William Byron last year. He had one of the best average running positions going into Daytona last year. And I mean, they want to run up front now. It's changed so much over the years. And, we as handicappers and like trying to bet on NASCAR, like now we're looking at these guys like, hey, who actually wants to be aggressive and wants to be up front, in front of the mess or in front of the fuel strategy kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, betting at Daytona has changed a lot. Racing at Daytona has changed a lot.
It really has. Again, I was watching those old races, and I've seen people on Twitter say, "Man, I would love to see that racing back from the mid '90s or late '90s." And I keep thinking, yeah, but if they knew then what we know now, even with those old cars and that old that track and that style of restrictor plate and all that, the racing would be different because we've
Yeah.
learned so much over the years. Things have become so much more optimized. And you talked about a fuel strategy. That's going to be important. That goes right into these manufacturers and alliances that I wanted to talk about. This has become such a manufacturer alliance driven style of racing because of the fuel strategy. You're actually trying to save and save and save fuel. So you spend less time on pit road that you're going to come in with your teammates. You're going to come in with your manufacturer teammates, with your top alliances. So let's talk about some of those alliances, Stevie, because there are, a little bit different with all the changes we've had in the offseason. I know, for example, Ryan Preece now at RFK Racing, but also Cole Custer and the Haas factory team. They're aligned with RFK. We've got some Penske alliances with some various teams. So what are you looking for in terms of manufacturers and alliances?
Yeah, I think mostly you'll see Ford work with Ford, Chevy work with Chevy, Toyota work with Toyota. I don't think it'd be too crazy. I think what's really interesting about the Ford camp in general, it's gone from, hey, we're working with Stuart Haas to now Stuart Haas is gone, and now it's, hey, we're working with Penske, hey, we're working with RFK. So I think RFK is the biggest beneficiary from Stuart Haas kind of leaving. I think they're going to
Yep.
get more Ford updates just in general, more Ford money. Ford was obviously helping Stuart Haas a lot money wise too. So I think now that Ford money has kind of gone more towards RFK, and I think Penske probably gets a little bit of a bump too. But I think Ford is where I'm kind of like watching the most this weekend as far as like how these teams are going to work together now that Stuart Haas is gone. So Chevy and Toyota, obviously adding a couple people, a couple cars here and there. I don't think it matters as much, but I think you'll see like Spire work with RCR as much as possible.
Mhm.
That kind of thing, where colleague works with RCR and, Hendrick kind of works with Hendrick. And I think at the end of the day, the racing has changed so much at Daytona where now, I mean, if you can just get in a line and kind of save fuel with anybody in front of you or behind you, you're going to do it. But I think if you can have like a Ford on a Ford or a Chevy on a Chevy kind of thing, it matters. But I don't know if it matters as much as it did maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And you also talked about the track position. And,
Yeah.
in years past, we could see a driver go from eighth to first in a few laps and win the race. It's so much harder with this style of racing, with this car, with what all these drivers know now. Track position is just so massively important that you may end up seeing some aggressive moves to try to get or keep that track position. I know Michael McDowell recently, last year, I believe it was, just threw a big block in the whole field at, I think it was Talladega, and wrecked half the field. That's how important it is to keep track position. So, obviously we've got track position, we've got pit strategy, manufacturer alliances, any other things that go into analyzing Daytona, maybe some intangibles, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, average running position is probably my favorite thing to look at now.
Yeah.
Finishing. I mean, I want to see who's finishing these races. I think that's important. But I mean, I honestly, I do a lot of my research for Daytona and Talladega by going back and like making notes of the actual race. Like, hey, 15 laps to go, who is where, who's on the best fuel strategy. I make a mental note of like which crew chiefs and which teams are making best fuel mileage. Like we saw that with Penske last year. We saw it with
Mhm.
Keselowski. We saw it with RFK. Like Ford's made really good fuel mileage multiple times. I mean, Joey Logano basically got in the playoffs by fuel mileage. So, yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff, like not stuff you think about really, 75% of the time. Daytona and Talladega are just different. So I do a lot of my research at Daytona outside of the numbers and just kind of making some mental notes on like where is this person putting themselves in, who's being aggressive, like making the notes of like, hey, who's the aggressive drivers in NASCAR right now, because they're either going to wreck or do really well for me, and those are the kind of guys that I want.
Yeah, definitely. One other, kind of intangible for me when we're betting Daytona, and we'll get to our bets here in just a second. But when we're betting for a winner, you really can't bet anybody shorter than like 16-1. It's just not a feasible, long-term profitable method. I've done the numbers many, many times over, looking at the very best drivers and their win rates at what I call the chaos races, which is Daytona and then like Daytona playoff cutoff races. They just don't win better than about one in every 16 times when you group them all together. Look at the past Daytona 500 winners. Yes, last year was William Byron. He was one of the more favored drivers under 20-1. They do win sometimes. I'm just saying their odds of winning maybe aren't as good as the price you're getting. 2023, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was 40-1. 2022, Austin Cindric was a rookie. You could get him as long as 50 or 60-1 at that time. You can't now, but at the time. 2021, Michael McDowell was 80-1, 100-1 in some spots to win the Daytona 500. So 3 of the last 4 have been long shot winners of the Daytona 500. You go back before that, Denny Hamlin won twice, definitely one of the favored drivers. Before that, Austin Dillon was in the 50s, 60s to win. So, this is a spot where long shot drivers can win and the favored drivers can win, but putting it all together, you just can't bet these Joey Logano's, these Denny Hamlins, these Brad Keselowski's at anything shorter than 16-1. It just doesn't work out. Yes, they've each won. Keselowski hasn't, but yes, Joey Logano, Denny Hamlin, Dale Jr., these guys win Daytona 500s. They just don't win them at the rate of one in every 12 or so starts, aside from, Denny Hamlin, who's won a few. But, when you lump them all together, how many times has Chase Elliott won the Daytona 500? How many times has Kyle Busch won the Daytona 500? All these great drivers, Brad Keselowski, are winless in the Daytona 500. It's just too short. So that's my final intangible. Don't go crazy. Maybe if you want to pick one or two for a sweat or something like that, but you got to have the expectation that if you're picking anybody shorter than 16-1, it's probably not going to be a long-term profitable bet for the Daytona 500 specifically. So let's dive into those bets. As I talked about last week, we're going to have a new format this year. Stage by stage picks. We're going to go through a race starting with stage 1, giving our shorter odds bet. Stage 2, our longer odds bet. In stage 3, we're going to go even longer. And then we'll have our combined victory lane pick. So it's time to throw the green flag on the Daytona 500 and fire off for stage 1. All right, first stage, Stevie, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, listen, like you said, I like to bet a lot of, longer odd bets at Daytona. But there's one thing that really stood out to me. I actually bet this like a week ago, and it hasn't moved, which I was kind of shocked it hasn't moved. But I'm going to go to the winning manufacturer here at Ford, plus 160. Like I said, I bet this at plus 160 a week ago. I did not think I'd be able to talk about this on the show because I really did think it would end up moving, but it really hasn't. I mean, Ford has won 3 of the last 6 Daytona races with the next-gen car. I mean, if we look at the 6 races here with the next-gen car, they've really dominated the raw speed, and I mean, they've dominated the raw speed all of last year on all the super speedways. So, I mean, one of the things that we just talked about a lot was average running position. If we look at Daytona with the next-gen car, Ford is 6 of the top 7 average running positions. We see it every single race. They qualify well at Daytona and Talladega. They work together really well. They have one of the best drafting duos when it comes to Buescher and Keselowski and Logano and Blaney. So, I mean, I know it's like a numbers thing and I know it's an odds thing as far as like Chevy being the favorite for this. But, I mean, when I look at all the numbers, I think Ford should be the favorite. So the fact that they were second, I agree with Toyota being third because they just don't have the numbers that the other teams have. So I'm going Ford plus 160 to win the Daytona 500.
Yeah, we've seen Ford. I mean, they're super strong at these super speedways, these drafting tracks. We know they also recently have been putting the cars up front in terms of qualifying. So you got a bunch of cars that'll be starting up front. They work together great. They're going to have that track position. And they've really dominated, especially in the past year with the new Ford body that came around last year. They've been really dominant in these drafting track races. So I'm right there with you. I like this bet a lot. For my stage 1 pick, I'm going to stay in that Ford camp, but I'm going to go to qualifying, and I'm going to take Ryan Blaney to win the pole at 20-1. You can get it at Bet365. There's some 18-1s out there. I'm fine with that. If we look at the 6 drafting track races last year, right? So 2 at Atlanta, 2 at Daytona, 2 at Talladega. The Penske cars and the Penske affiliated cars, which are Front Row Motorsports cars and the Wood Brothers Racing car, they locked out the front row in all 6 races, meaning they started both first and second. They had cars starting first and second in all 6 races. So Blaney's sitting here at 20-1, while all these other guys are sitting here 8-1, 7-1, those kinds of numbers to win the pole. Yeah, Blaney wasn't the best qualifier of the group, but you mentioned it, Stevie. We're going to practice this time. So that might give Penske, Blaney specifically, a chance to really trim out and get aligned with those other RFK, or I should say Front Row Motorsports and Penske cars there. So I think 20-1 just a little bit too long on Ryan Blaney. I'd like to play this down to like maybe 15 or 12 to 1 in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very high on forwards. I mean, Austin Cindric, Joey Logano have two of the best starting position averages. Blaney, I think that goes more to like being very aggressive in the duels and having some issues in years past. But yeah, I mean, Blaney's going to be fast. Penske's going to be fast. Ford's going to be fast. So yeah, I'm in. I like this one. Yeah, I mean, bet this on Wednesday, Tuesday. I mean, I meant Tuesday. We usually record on Wednesday, so bet this on Tuesday if you're going to bet this, because once practice and stuff starts kicking off and qualifying, like you're not going to get this better than 20 to 1. I don't feel so. Yeah, I'm with you on this. If you're going to bet this, I'd bet this on Tuesday.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is something you got to bet. Once you hear this episode, go ahead, go over to your sports books, get it 20 to 1, 18 to 1 now before it ends up shorter than that. So we completed stage one. We're going to throw the green and white checkered on stage one. But before we start stage two, I want to let you all know that you can get NASCAR projections from the best in the game, our very own Stephen Young. Stevie TPFL is one of the most respected minds in the NASCAR DFS industry. His premium package has produced a Millionaire Maker winner in 4 straight seasons. This year, I'll also be providing my personal cup projections exclusively for the 2025 season as part of the premium package at Roto Grinders, in addition to what I normally do at Fantasy Labs. So get access now and start building lineups for Daytona. Use promo code RUNNINGHOT at checkout for $10 off this premium NASCAR package at Fantasy Labs. That's promo code RUNNINGHOT, all one word, for $10 off. Or find a link in the description for $10 off at Roto Grinders as well. Again, that link will be in the episode description. So, Stevie, before we get to stage two, this is 2025, Stevie. NASCAR DFS really kicked off in 2015. So we're starting our second decade of DFS. You and I have both been there from the beginning. Just talk about NASCAR DFS and especially Daytona.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously changed a ton since we first started. The cars have changed, practice, qualifying, all that stuff has changed. How you approach it, I mean, scoring has changed, but I mean, one thing that hasn't changed is just, having an edge. I feel like even after all these years, there's still an edge. You and I have talked a lot about like edge and practice numbers and stuff lately and taking advantage of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, overall, Daytona fantasy is awesome. I know you've had some big scores. I took down the FanDuel contest last year for 50K. Like you mentioned when you were reading the promo, like I've had a subscriber 4 straight years take down solo or combined in the DraftKings. So we definitely have the recipe for success for Daytona. You just got to embrace the variance in DFS NASCAR in general, just like kind of when you're betting it. But I think that at the end of the day, if we're going to talk NASCAR DFS, we just say it how it needs to be said. Embrace the variance and put yourself in the best position as possible.
Embrace the variance. I love that because betting, or I should say NASCAR DFS for Daytona is all about embracing that variance. Don't get overconfident because we don't know what's going to happen. This race, the Daytona 500, is one of the least predictable races in the whole calendar, aside from probably the Daytona near the playoff cutoff race. I can build a statistical model and I can get an R squared of maybe 9, 10, 11% ish, meaning the other 90% of the race is completely unpredictable. And so you got to embrace the variance. And you mentioned it. We've had great success here. I took down the Clash when it was at Daytona 2 years in a row. One of the years I had the top 5 lineups in the Clash. I've been close to winning the Daytona 500 contest twice. One time I was there in person with you in 2016, and I was leading going in the last lap and didn't end up with the win. Also in 2022, I was leading the Millionaire Maker until all my guys wrecked out with like 11 laps to go. So that's how it goes, but it's fun.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for it. Back for another season of NASCAR DFS. All right, we're starting stage 2. Let's fire it off for stage 2. Second stage, Stevie, we're going a little bit longer in odds here. What do you got?
Yeah, so I have 3 bets that I bet outrights, and then I have 3 more for our next turn, our next stage. So I'm gonna go Busher 20-1, Wallace 20-1, and Barry 25-1. First of all, very high on Ford, like I've talked about already. Busher, Keselowski, two of the best combos when we're looking at where they run, where they start, where they finish at these types of racetracks. So really like Busher. Think he's a guy that's going to be up there most of the race and have an opportunity to potentially win the race. So you can shop these odds. They're going to move up and down all week. I put down what I personally bet them at, so you kind of have an idea. So I like this down to 20-1, and then Bubba at 20-1. I mean, he has the second best average finish at Daytona with the next gen car. We're just waiting for it to break through. I mean, he's always up there in the mix. He has that right aggressive slash smart when it comes to these racetracks. And the thing that I love about Bubba, and I know Toyota probably doesn't love me saying this, but he'll work with anybody that's going to make him go forward. He doesn't strictly like work with just Toyotas. I mean, if you watch Bubba and you watch him, he doesn't necessarily always pit with the Toyotas like other Toyotas do. So Bubba is going to do what you have to do at Daytona, and that's be a little selfish. And I think that to win this race, you have to be a little selfish. So like him at 20-1. And then I'm just going to go right back to the car that just won at Daytona, and that's the Wood Brothers Ford with Josh Berry driving it now at 25-1. I think that more betting on the Ford power in the car. I wanted to bet this a little bit better than 25-1, but I said to myself that I was going to bet this car no matter what. So I just bet a quarter unit on it. So half a unit on Busher and Wallace, quarter unit on Barry. Really just kind of betting on some of these long shot Fords. But I think when you're looking at it, these 3 plus the guy that we have in victory lane are the like shortest odds that I'm betting for a win this week. And that's just kind of where I'm at.
I agree with you. I think that's about as short as I'm going to go, is in that 20-1 range. I've personally, looking last year at my model and what it spat out for the 2 Daytona races, I'm finding a lot of value in this 20s and 30s to 1 range. So I think a lot of good picks in here. I'm not specifically giving any of these on running hot here. I'm going to wait to pick and choose between these 20, 30 to 1 drivers, maybe after I see a little practice, a little bit of the duels. But I definitely love this 20, 30 to 1 range. And right there with you. I think if I had to pick one of these 3 right now, I'd be taking Bubba Wallace at 20-1. But definitely like all 3 of these. For my stage 2 pick, I'm going to go with a 75-1 odds driver. And I'm going to take Cole Custer at 75-1. He's not a guy you normally think of at super speedway racing, drafting racing. But look, that Haas factory team is now aligned with Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing. We've seen those RFK cars at super speedways, especially in the past year or two, be very, very good. Chris Buescher has won. We know Brad Keselowski's always out front leading, very aggressive. So those cars have the goods to get it done. And that means Cole Custer will be drafting with those guys, around those guys. That should elevate his game here at Daytona. So, he really hasn't been known as a great super speedway driver, but I think that's what's keeping his odds so long. You're getting 75-1 for a driver that is going to be paired up with Brad Keselowski, paired up with Chris Buescher. And I think that's just a winning formula. So look for, if he doesn't wreck out, look for Cole Custer to be in the mix for the win if he's got some RFK help there.
I think he's going to work a lot with RFK just in general throughout the season, not just this weekend. So I think that's one of the biggest things for this one car factory team is, hey, where is my alliance? My alliance is Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher. And we just got done talking about how they're 2 of the best pushers and being able to drive through the field really hard nowadays. Those 2 guys can make it to the front. If Custer just kind of latches on and just has the opportunity. I mean, at 75-1, if you're running inside the top 10 with like 5 laps to go, you feel really good about your chances of having a 75-1 driver up there. So, yeah, I mean, I like Custer a lot as well.
Definitely. So our stage 2 picks. Stevie has Chris Buescher, Bubba Wallace, and Josh Berry in the 20-1 range, 25-1 range. I have Cole Custer at 75-1. You can do a little tenth or quarter unit on that, whatever you choose. Cole Custer 75-1 for me at FanDuel or Caesars. 2 stages down, we got 1 stage to go, and that's stage 3. All right, final stage, Stevie, we're adding a stage pick for stage 3. Longest odds bets. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we just got done talking about Cole Custer. I'm on that bet as well. I bet that one. But my other two in this stage, Noah Gragson, 40-1. One of the most aggressive drivers in NASCAR in general. We talk a lot about like Ricky Stenhouse and how aggressive he is. We're getting Noah at 40-1. Some books you can get this a little longer. They've just been taking stuff down and posting it. So I bet this at 40-1. I really like it at 40-1. He's aggressive. He is in a new number. They have an alliance with Penske. They had a ton of speed on super speedways last season. We talked a lot about Michael McDowell. You talked about how Michael McDowell kind of blocked the field and wrecked the field. That's because he was really fast. I expect Noah Gragson to be fast. Noah's selfish. He's aggressive. He's everything that we want. My other one is kind of a heartfelt bet. I'm going to bet Martin Truex Jr. at 40-1. Never won on a super speedway, Talladega and Daytona, throughout his career. I have a really good feeling that Truex gets into this race. I'm not too concerned about that. I absolutely love this. I'm taking Truex at 40-1. I just don't feel like Martin Truex Jr. is going to go up there and push it for stage points. I think Martin Truex Jr. is going to run a really smart race, and maybe just being there at the end of the race gives him an opportunity. So I bet 0.15 units on each 3 of these bets. Truex at 40-1, Gragson at 40-1, and Custer at 75-1. But man, I have to bet Martin. It's like we bet Gibbs so much last year. I got to bet Martin Truex Jr. one more time, where I actually think he'll be in equipment to win the race. I actually think Martin Truex Jr. is going to be one of the fastest qualifiers as far as these cars that have to kind of qualify.
Yeah, no, I mean, Stevie, you and I were at the Daytona 500 in 2016. That was the finish between Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr., where we literally could not tell who won the race in person. Kind of brief hesitation. I was standing, behind Eric Almirola's pit box, but they were, I think, right next to Denny Hamlin's pit box. And then all of a sudden you just hear the Denny Hamlin crew explode. So we knew Denny Hamlin won, but I couldn't tell in the moment if it was Truex or Hamlin who won that race. Martin Truex Jr., even though he's never won in a super speedway, has been very, very close. And I think you make a great point. He doesn't have to race for stage points. He can just hang back, chill out, just make sure he stays on the lead lap, that kind of thing, and then really go for it in stage 3, which is different from what he's had to do recently because he's in a championship mode already from the start that stage points matter even as early as Daytona. Well, he's retired aside from running these one-off races, so he doesn't care about the stage points. So that does a lot of good for him. I also will say, make sure you look at your sportsbook's rules, their house rules, because some books, the bet will be action as long as he attempts to qualify. But some books, the bet won't be action unless he makes the race. So you can just get a little extra edge that way by just shopping and looking at house rules as well. So I wanted to make that note. For my stage 3 pick, technically these aren't the longest odds bets anymore. They moved down from 100-1 to 65-1. But I'm going to go, if you go over to DraftKings, go to the race props tab, and then click on most fastest laps. I'm betting on the driver to have the most fastest laps in the Daytona 500, and I have 8 of them for y'all. Some of these guys were as long as 100-1. They're all 65-1 now. And I'm going to take Cole Custer, Daniel Suarez, Zane Smith, Michael McDowell, Josh Berry, Austin Dillon, Shane Van Gisbergen, and Elio Castroneves to have the most fastest laps of the race. Now, you'll notice Alex Bowman and Chris Buescher are also 65-1. I did not pick those two, and here's the reason. Let's talk about fastest laps at Daytona. How do you get fastest laps? you need the draft. And if you're running up front, you're not getting the full benefit of the draft. So Chris Buescher, Alex Bowman, I expect to run up front enough that, I do like 65 to 1 on them. I just like these other guys better because these other guys have more of a chance to be running mid pack or in the back. Also, both Chris Buescher and Alex Bowman tend to run fewer fastest laps than their average running position at super speedways. And that's the key. Average running position directly correlates with the number of fastest laps. In that if you're running further back in the pack, you get more fastest laps. So these guys that could be running towards the back are actually better value. Think about it. There's 40 or 41 drivers in the race. If everybody had an equal chance of fastest laps, they'd all be 40 to 1. And fastest laps are almost completely random here, but not totally, because of average running position or your current running position. You're more likely to run a faster lap if you're running further back. And with Michael McDowell moving away from Front Row Motorsports to Spire, yes, we've seen Corey LaJoie do well at Spire. We've seen, Justin Haley can run out front there, but those cars aren't quite as good as the Front Row Motorsports cars in terms of super speedway. So I think there's some value now in Michael McDowell running further back. And Zane Smith, these guys, they're not really leading laps at the Daytona 500. The guys who are leading laps are your Keselowskis, your Logano's, your Hamlins, right? Kyle Busch's. And those guys are all priced shorter than 40 to 1, yet they're not going to be the guys that get the most fastest laps. If we look at the 6 Daytona races in the next gen era, 2 per year, here's the list of drivers that have finished in the top 3 in most fastest laps in one of those races. AJ Allmendinger, he's done it twice. Anthony Alfredo, Fast Pasta. Austin Hill. BJ McLeod. Brad Keselowski's done it once, so there's a bigger name. Bubba Wallace has done it twice, another bigger name. Carson Hocevar, Cody Ware, Corey LaJoie, Daniel Hemrick, Eric Jones, Joey Logano's done it once, so there's another bigger name. John Hunter Nemechek, Kurt Busch, Kyle Larson, Michael McDowell, Noah Gragson, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. twice. And even those bigger names, when they do run the most fastest laps, it's because they've been running further back. Joey Logano, when he did it, he led 1 lap in that year's Daytona 500 in 2022. His average running position was 18th. Of those 18 top 3 most fastest lap guys, it was only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's only 6, of the 21, right? Because there were some ties in there as well. So 6 of the 21 drivers that ended up top 3 in fastest laps had an average running position of inside the top 20. That means all the rest, 15 out of 21, had an average running position of 20th or worse. So you do want to kind of stack the back, if you will, and take these drivers that aren't likely to be running up front, yet they're giving us longer odds as drivers that are maybe more likely to have fastest laps. So I know this is a long explanation, but I wanted to go through the numbers here and show why 65 to 1 is really nice value. These guys should probably all be like, if they're more likely to run in the back, should be a little bit better than 40 to 1 to have the most fastest laps.
Yeah, so AJ Allmendinger last year at the Daytona 500, he had 12. He was the guy that had the most fastest laps. His average running position was 25th. I mean, it directly correlates. John Hunter was second, 24.6, and Anthony Alfredo was third at 23.6. So everything that you just said, yes.
Yes. I like it. That's all you need.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing else that needs to be said. I mean, if you look at, I was looking at like multiple years, and like it directly correlates. Whoever is running back towards the back, because they get that little bit of draft and they get to run that speed. I think AJ Allmendinger last year was down a lap and was kind of out there running by himself, running faster than anybody else, because everybody was trying to save fuel. Yeah.
Everybody was trying to save fuel, and normally when you're in the pack, you run faster in a pack, but the whole pack was saving fuel. Allmendinger's out there by himself. Normally, if you're running by yourself, you're 2-3 seconds a lap slower without the draft. Allmendinger was running faster than the field because they were all trying to save fuel. So, the leader is the one that's going to be the least likely. And I actually also looked at like who led the most laps in a race. And if you look at the top 3 lap leaders in the 6 Daytona races in the next gen era, the most fastest laps run was Justin Haley in the 2nd Daytona race last year. He had 8 fastest laps, but that still didn't crack the top 3. The next most was 6, and then everybody else was 5 or fewer fastest laps. You're going to need at least 8, probably. More likely 9, 10, 11, 12 fastest laps to be the fastest lap leader. So if you're leading laps, you're not racking up fastest laps, just the way it goes at Daytona. So yeah, some fun bets here. 10th of a unit on all of these at 65-1 means you have less than a full unit bet. And if one of these hits, you've made 6.5 units. So definitely like this strategy here. So that's my stage 3 pick. Whole bunch of drivers, 8 of them at 65-1 to have the race's most fastest laps. That completes stage 3. That completes the race on the Daytona 500. But there's one thing left to do. Drive in the victory lane. Stevie, what's our victory lane pick for the Daytona 500?
Yeah, we're going to go to last year's Daytona 500 winner. We're going to go to William Byron at 22-1. We've kind of talked about it as we were going through here. Doesn't really shock either one of us that William Byron won the Daytona 500 last year. He's been very aggressive with the next-gen car. He tries to run up front. And, I mean, Chevy's strategy has been fantastic on these races. So they've been getting in position to win these races. And you can never count out Hendrick Motorsports when it comes to the pole at Daytona, especially now when we're going to have a practice before qualifying. So I think that it wouldn't shock me really to see like maybe a guy like William Byron or a Hendrick car be on the front row again. I mean, Rick Hendrick kind of made it his personal duty to make sure they were on the front row there for the longest time. The next gen car has definitely changed that a little bit, but yeah, I think William Byron at 22-1. I talked a little bit about some of these like shorter, longer odd bets with Buescher, Wallace, and Barry. My 4th one is William Byron. I absolutely like this. Again, average running position matters so much to me. Aggressiveness matters, strategy matters, and he just kind of checks all the boxes for be willing to bet a 22-1 bet on him.
Absolutely. Right there with you. William Byron is one of those guys that I had right on the edge of where I was saying 16-1 is the shortest I would bet any driver. He was one of those guys I had close to like 16, 18-1 in that neighborhood in the 2nd Daytona race last year. He won the Daytona 500 last year as well. So in both Daytona races, he's a guy that I was showing closer to 18-1, let's say. So at 22-1, I'm happy to take him probably as my shortest odds driver to win the Daytona 500. I don't think I'll be going below 22-1 on any driver for this particular race in terms of a winning bet. So right there with you, William Byron, 22-1 to win at Caesars. And I do think they have a profit boost on him as well to 24-1, I believe, if you've got that available to you. So one thing left to do, Stevie. We gave out all our bets, but it's the Daytona 500. We got to pick a winner, right? Just a race winner. We don't care about odds. We're not betting. Just who do you got to win the Daytona 500?
Well, my wallet wants Cole Custer to win, but I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney. Can't bet him at his odds, but I think he has one of the best, like the highest probability to win this race if we take everything out of it. But I mean, obviously that's what you can't do at Daytona. You can't take everything out because everything will happen. But yeah, Ryan Blaney is who I have to win the race if I wasn't going to actually bet his current odds.
Yeah, and I was torn. I have 2 drivers. So I'm sorry, Tyler Reddick, but you didn't quite make the cut. For some reason, I just have a feeling about him this year. He's really good at these tracks as well. But I'm going to go Brad Keselowski to finally get the monkey off his back for the Daytona 500. We know Kes is one of the most aggressive drivers, sometimes overly aggressive, but that also gets him out front a lot. And I think Brad Keselowski finally gets it done and wins the Daytona 500 to cement a Hall of Fame career. So that is going to do it for us. Thank you for listening to the Daytona 500 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's Motorsports Betting Podcast. If you'd like to tail some of the bets we discussed today, look for the quick slip links in the podcast and video description, or Go to actionnetwork.com/bet now to get those quick slip bets. And don't forget, you can get $10 off our premium NASCAR package at Fantasy Labs and RotoGrinders with promo code RunningHot. You can also look for those links in the description as well for this episode. We'll be back next week, of course, to talk bets for the Ambetter Health 400 at Atlanta Motor Speedway, another drafting track. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.